Following the Mexican War for Independence, Mexico underwent a significant political debate over whether the government should be centralist or federalist. Initially, Mexico had a centralist government with an emperor, but this was eventually replaced by a federalist system. In the Constitution of 1824, most Mexicans believed that a new government would bring stability and prosperity. However, political instability persisted, and the Mexican debt continued to rise. Additionally, Spain attempted to reconquer Mexico. In 1829, the Spanish launched an invasion from nearby Cuba, but Mexican forces under Antonio López de Santa Anna prevailed. This was the last Spanish effort to reconquer Mexico, and in 1836, they would ultimately recognize Mexican independence. As the 1830s approached, centralists began to gain the upper hand. There was a growing sentiment that a stronger leader was needed to address issues in Mexico, including the unrest in the north and the rebellious Anglos who were circumventing constitutions. These events led the Mexican government to dispatch Manuel de Mier y Terán, a nationalist and hero of the Mexican War for Independence. Officially, he was sent to inspect the border between the United States and Mexico, but his true mission was to monitor the situation in Texas. While there, he checked on slavery in the region and ensured that the Anglos were adhering to colonization requirements. In 1828, Terán toured Stephen F. Austin's colony and met with Austin and Jared Gross, one of the largest slave-holding Americans in Texas. He visited Gross's plantation and noted that the slaves were not living in cages, but he was aware of the ecological impact of cotton production. Gross's plantation, for example, had been carved out of the forest, with tree stumps still visible. Despite appreciating the wealth the colonists brought to the region, Terán was concerned that many Anglos were not fulfilling their obligations to reside in Texas and outnumbered the Mexicans in the area. To address these issues, he suggested that American immigration should be outlawed. One person who read Terán's report was Lucas Alemán, the second most powerful man in the Mexican government. A centralist who had never supported Anglo colonization, Alemán was further alarmed by the Fredonian Revolt. Armed with Terán's report, he resolved to take action. The Mexican government passed the law of April 6, 1830, which ended American immigration into Texas, sealed the border between Texas and the United States, and authorized the Mexican president to establish forts and collect taxes. One incentive to attract American colonists was a 6-year tax exemption, allowing them time to establish a livelihood. Unlike modern income tax, 19th-century taxation focused on imports and exports. The forts enabled the Mexican government to collect these taxes and monitor the Texans, particularly to close Decree 56, which Texans were using to illegally import slaves. American and Hispanic Texans were upset with the law of April 6, which played a significant role in the lead-up to the Texas Revolution. The Mexican government established forts at the mouths of the Trinity and Brazos rivers. They were intended to collect taxes on the exportation of cotton, since the easiest way to get the crop to market was by sailing it down the rivers. These forts contained soldiers loyal to Mexico City. Anglo-Texans did not react well to this, and conflict erupted almost immediately. They resented paying taxes and objected even more to the soldiers' presence, which they perceived as supervision. Tensions escalated when runaway slaves from Louisiana sought refuge at the fort along the Trinity River, also known as Anahuac. The fort's commander allowed them in, stating that slavery did not legally exist in Texas, thus they were free. They were also upset that the Mexican commander was not even Mexican. He was a Kentuckian named John Bradburn. The conflict with Anglo-Texans only ended when Bradburn's superior relieved him, calming things down. Another conflict was brewing at Fort Velasco, along the Brazos. The Texans attempted to steal a cannon to destroy the Anahuac fort. In the ensuing fight, 10 Texans and 5 Mexicans were killed. By 1832, Texans were upset, but not yet ready for revolution. Mexico was collecting taxes, positioning soldiers in Texas, and outlawing further American immigration. However, rebellion was risky, as the Mexican army was one of the country's biggest institutions. If Texans didn't want their own country, what did they want? They labored to create their own state within the Mexican Republic, separating Texas from Coahuila. This would allow them to write their own constitution, which would permit slavery, as the Mexican Constitution of 1824 allowed states to decide that issue. In 1833, the Anglos held a convention to discuss the potential of Texas statehood. This was part of the American political tradition, but not the Mexican one. Hispanic Texans did not participate, as such a convention was illegal under Mexican law. However, this did not mean they did not support a separate state. The convention sent Stephen F. Austin to Mexico City to advocate for Texas statehood. Austin believed his chances were good and that the Mexican government would agree to the request. President Antonio López de Santa Anna had a history of supporting federalism. Austin first met with the vice president, who was actually running the government. That meeting did not go well, so Austin requested to see Santa Anna himself. Santa Anna promised that once Texas had enough people, it would become its own state. Austin argued that it was time to fulfill that promise, but Santa Anna responded that it was not a good time to do so. Centralism was on the rise, and although Santa Anna supported federalism, he understood the political situation in his country. Austin's proposal ended badly and was practically dead on arrival. Understandably upset, Austin let his emotions get the best of him. He wrote a letter to the leaders in San Antonio advocating for a separate state despite Santa Anna's refusal. The letter was intercepted, and Austin was arrested and imprisoned in Mexico City. He would not be released until 1835. Even with Austin's arrest and imprisonment, Texans were not ready to rebel. Things were going well since the government had given them their land, and revolution would endanger that. By then, cotton prices had stabilized and were increasing. Despite Austin's failure to gain Texas statehood and imprisonment, there was one success. He was able to convince the Mexican government to repeal Article 11 of the law, which prohibited immigration into Texas and suspend existing colonization contracts. However, Austin's faith in the goodwill of the Mexican government weakened, and he would eventually become convinced that Texas should pursue independence.